Throughout the years, anime and Japanese manga have come and gone, but none have made quite the media splash only to let the ripples fade away. Like Akira Amano's Katekyo Hitman Reborn. Now, before we go any further, I'm not holding your hand and questioning your intelligence, but I feel as though people often throw the word hidden gem around so much to the point where they most likely don't even know what it actually means. So, just to clear to you, so we're in the same level of understanding, a hidden gem is an idiom which means something which is extremely outstanding and not many people have know about, which is pretty straightforward definition. It's no secret that no matter how large shonen is today, and even the day after, there's going to be at least some shonen animes that, despite how good or even great they are, never seem to get mainstream attention. And since the topic of today's video was also very heavily under-discussed or even acknowledged, that I want to clarify my title ever so slightly. That's not to say that there aren't plenty of shonen titles that are considered hidden gem as well. There are quite a few that had been mentioned by most people, for example Toriko, The Gray Man, Zact Bell, and even Shaman King. But there is one certain classic long-running shonen that I haven't seen being brought up for quite some time. That is none other than 2004's Katekyo Hitman Reborn, or simply just as its US title, Reborn. Rather quickly, before I talk about the series itself and what is it all about, I believe we have to start from the genesis of when Hitman Reborn started and what exactly happened to it so far. Katekyo Hitman Reborn is a Japanese manga that was published in the Weekly Jump magazine, which started running in 2004, March 31st, while its anime adaptation aired in 2006, October 7th. With 7 million manga copies sold, it earned a spot to be the 10th best-selling Weekly Shonen Jump manga in 2007, only to exceed further all the way in 2012. Unfortunately, little did we know that this roller coaster ride was about to come to a screeching halt. It's been already a decade so far, and the series has vanished since 2010. The manga ended in November 12, 2012. Not only did the series itself vanish for unable to have a chance for a continuation like most other animes tend to have, but apparently it also faded in popularity as well. This left fans, including myself, bewildered. When classics fade away from history, that makes me very sad. It is such a tragedy that a small number of people has actually watched it, or even read it for that matter. I want that to change because the series is a legitimate underrated classic shonen. If this is the first time you ever heard of Hitman Reborn and you'll be willing to sit down and give it a watch, I assure you that you will definitely stumble upon a unique, charming, and comedic series, with a worthwhile build-up as well as amazing climactic action that the series has to offer. It is such a trip experience. Even if long-running anime isn't your thing, like most people are as it seems nowadays, do not fear, because I can somewhat relate to you in that aspect, and I really do understand where you're coming from. Though, while there's no accounting for taste, it is my hope I can get you to see this long-running shonen to similar way to my perspective. So now that we have that out of the way, let's start with what is Hitman Reborn all about. I will warn that the series may take a long time getting into, since the manga was initially going to be a gag manga, so the change of action may have to wait. The story of Hitman Reborn revolves around the most powerful mafia family in Italy, named the Vongala family, which currently consists to the first head of the Vongala all the way to the ninth head. The ninth head of the Vongala is an old man who's ready for a retirement. However, before he can step down, he requires a worthy 10th successor to the Vongala family. The ninth head boss enlisted the help of a professional hitman to train and prepare the next head boss of the family. And that 10th mafia boss just so happens to be 13-year-old Tsuneyoshi Sawada, or Suna for short. A timid middle school student who is mostly known for his kindness that he gives to others, but isn't actually good in his studies. Due to his poor grades, whom is later known by his peers as No Good Suna, he lacks self-discipline, he behaves very wimpily, he gets beaten up by his bullies, and even by nature itself. However, this all changed until he meets an infant named Reborn. The same professional hitman that the ninth boss had sent is none other than an infant, and it is here that you learn that No Good Suna is destined to become the 10th head of the Vongala family. Reborn then introduces himself as a home tutor to help him with his studies and train him to be a worthy mafia boss. Shocked in disbelief by this, Suna quickly disagrees with the offer to be a mafia boss, due to the violent history that surrounds the Vongala family itself for generations. Now you'd think with a premise like that, it would have to do with a lot of the mafia undergoings or even about the organization, but the first arc of Hitman Reborn is pretty much a slice of life genre and often has this slow-paced vibe to it. While the beginning arc of Hitman Reborn may not seem all that very important, especially if you're generally a fan of pure action animes, the beginning arc episodes of the anime are actually incredibly significant to the overarching narrative and tie in with the episodes from the later, more dramatic arcs. The key here is to really know the characters and to understand them as individuals. The daily life arc of Hitman Reborn is very essential, especially because many of the character traits and wacky quirks established in this arc, comedic or otherwise, context is everything, and the daily life arc provides context, even if it seems unimportant at first. It may seem kinda difficult to getting into it now, as intimidating as it sounds, but don't let it fool you though, because the series actually contains insanely large cast of unique and diverse characters that actually plays an important role later in these series arcs. And even if there are a couple of characters that personally didn't sit well with you, does have a huge upside. It really makes all of their growth much more apparent. One example of my favorite scene in this arc that I can bring up was when Suna was at the hospital after getting wounded by some of Reborn's training. And then suddenly, everybody that he met each day popped by to see him. And we were just reminded of how much lonely this character used to be. It's amazing to see how these new friends that he met impacted his life for the better. While rewatching the series for decades, I gotta say that this arc in particular grew on me. Not only specifically because of its comedy or even its animation, but it's the kind of arc in a shonen anime that I can actually relax to. Yeah, there are some comedic moments, running around half naked, and a few little boxing match action and such, but above all these elements, what really captured my interest in the beginning arc of the series was the peaceful vibe and the charming atmosphere that it has. While almost every long-running shonen jumps you straight into the action stuff that you usually get with animes like this, in Hitman Reborn, you get to actually see these characters about how they act or what they do on their daily basis before plunging them into the shonen action adventure that you normally expect from these kinds of long-running shonen. Eventually, as soon as you took your first step at the 20th episode of Karakyo Hitman Reborn, this is when the story starts to shine, albeit in a somewhat darker tone, at least for the Kokugyo Gang arc, but the more you proceed, you get more than what meets the eye. In other words, you'll be taken for a ride.
I wanna take you for a ride. I wanna take you for a ride.
This is when all the shonen trope action starts to happen so suddenly in the series. However, it is done in a way that I consider to be really smart in my book. And it gets better because you actually get to have a basic understanding of what's going on and why is it significant. From the history of the Vongala, the goals that they seek, their rings, which each of them contains a power that are very specific to its user, by requiring a ceremony battle to determine who are the rightful owners of such items, the concept of the dying will flame, which is described as a high-density form energy that is refined from one's own life force, a flame that closely resembles that of an invisible blood cycle, as though the flame itself is somehow alive, whose abilities are connected to the will and the resolve of its user. It's the symbol of the Mafia world. Like fingerprints or voices, each Dying Will flame has a different shape and distinct characteristics. In the beginning of the series, it had only minor relevance with the overall plot, mostly through its relation with Rainbow's Dying Will bullet, but as the story progresses, the Dying Will flame soon evolved into a more central element and is currently the source of most of the supernatural powers seen in the entire series. Throughout the Vongala family, each head are in need of guardians if they are strive to become a proper leader. These guardians are required to fill the following guardian positions as follows: Storm, Rain, Sun, Lightning, Cloud, and Mist. Each of Suna's guardians are introduced to during the first arc of the series. Thanks to Reborn's choices of these characters, they actually have a huge potential to be worthy of their respective titles as guardians. So, let's talk a little about them. At first sight, Gokodera is passed off as this Sasuke, Vegeta, Bakugo clone, as in to describe a typical secondary shonen character. He didn't really see Suna as a worthy boss and often doubts him and even talks back to him. But after Suna saving his life from his own dynamite bomb, something that Gokodera is an expert at, you'd expect for Gokodera to say stuff like, "Go away from me, I still don't see you as a Vongala boss." But he ended up kneeling before Suna and stated on how he misjudged him and even sees Suna as a worthy boss, and he even offers to become Suna's right-hand man, Deputy. Loyal is what describes Hayato's personality trait. While he may be hot-headed and often becomes aggressive to anyone who isn't Suna or Reborn, little by little he sees everyone that's part of the Vongala as a family. To Suna, being his right-hand man and pride of the Vongala doesn't matter to him. He constantly tells Gokodera to not risk his life over these reasons. Despite Hayato's words and motivations remains the same, their meaning is different. He still strives to serve Suna as his right-hand man. He takes his role very seriously. His character growth is some of my favorite elements to him of the series. He knows Suna very well and that he didn't want him to be the kind of guardian who's reckless at everything and only fights when he's told to. He chooses to be Suna's right-hand man, as in the one who is able to survive to laugh side by side with him. Despite Gokodera being the primary deputy of Suna, Yamamoto is the first guardian to ever introduce. Although Yamamoto can be an airhead for the majority of the series, similarly to Suna, he also has a redeemable quality as a character. I like his positive attitude. He has this warm and friendly personality and is rarely ever seen not smiling. He does at some point, but throughout the course of the series, he always remains sane, that he even went so far as to think that Vongala Mafia is some kind of roleplay game to him. Sounds dumb, but he never regrets it, that he even puts his life on the line on several occasions. Yamamoto's portrayal in the story is that of a stereotypical Japanese teenager. His name is Takeshi and surname Yamamoto are both common Japanese names. His looks are quite ordinary too for a Japanese teenager. He's a big fan of baseball, which is a popular sport in Japan. His family owns a sushi restaurant, and later in the story he uses a katana. Sasagawa Ryohei. Much like how Yamamoto is obsessed with baseball, Ryohei has his own obsession or hobby, which is boxing. Ryohei is very enthusiastic and often gets very excited by Suna and everyone else in the family whenever they're on a battle. Ryohei lives his life and prefers to take things to the extreme, being his pun throughout the course of the show. While often having a loud behavior, he has a personality that definitely grew on me. He looks at the sign of weakness as a room of an improvement. Ryohei loves training, and I mean a lot. Like, this guy would legit run or jog the whole limb of Japan and back. That is how dedicated he is to his hobby, showing such true resolve motivation to what he likes. Much like how he's dedicated to boxing and training, corresponding to how much I myself am dedicated myself to the series. Honestly, if there's anybody in the show that you will most likely hate at first sight, would have to be Lambo. Lambo is a cowardly child who initially wants to kill Reborn. He is a spoiled and cowardly child who has his own hobby. Stealing candies from everyone he sees? Yeah. Although, much like how I state, each character that starts in a low point does have a huge upside. For one thing, Lambo actually has a story. He was previously a bovino familia, but because of his awful behavior, they sold him to Reborn, giving him the responsibility to raise him well and take care of him, which kinda explains his behavior since still, he's a baby. Initially flawed in every way, which balances his character a little bit. While Lambo may not be the most well-received character in the series, it's good to see him come together with everyone in the more serious arcs. He's not a useless character, far from it. Despite being a baby, he can still fight, and much like everyone else, he has a responsibility in earning their position as a Vongala Guardian. He gets the job done despite him failing. In fact, his weapon actually has a great feature to introduce several arcs, which brings us to his weapon, the 10-year bazooka, in which the ability to switch the user using it with their own self from 10 years in the future. This same weapon that made such a big impact that it introduces several important arcs. Personally, while Lambo may not be a well-received character, you can hate him as a person, but to wish that he doesn't exist in the show wouldn't give us these important, amazing arcs. While earning a spot to be a Vongala Guardian, Hibari prefers to be alone and cares very little for his own subordinates. He loves Namimori Middle more than anything. Hibari is very proud of his school, so much so that he's the only person who even likes their school's anthem, even using it as his ringtone thanks to his bird, Hebird. Reborn piqued Hibari's curiosity in the Mafia early on in the series, and Hibari considers him a worthy opponent, having a strong urge to fight him one day. Even though I like Hibari's confidence and strength, he often attacks without thinking, which results in it being his shortfall. Though that's not to say it's a bad thing, since he started off disrespecting Suna way more than how Gokudera once did. But little by little, he starts to see him as a boss due to his sheer power to protect his friends. He is widely known for being the most fan favorite of the entire show, at least by the time the series was ongoing. The Mist Guardians is split between two people since they do share the same body. Starting off with Mukuro, he's the Kokokyu Arc's primary villain, introduced as a 15-year-old former mafia criminal and the leader of the Kokokyu gang, which consists of heinous criminals who have recently escaped from an Italian prison. I really love how Mukuro's role in the story slowly shifts as well. He had changed due to being around Suna a lot more throughout his experience. He personally found Suna very interesting because he doesn't exhibit the traditional aspects of a mafia boss, violent, arrogant, etc. At first, he wanted to possess Suna as a part of his revenge plan. However, his defeat at the hands of Suna taught him some sense of humility, and not everyone in the Mafia is terrible. Aside from Reborn, Mukuro was also that one character that fundamentally changed Suna. Mukuro is what made Suna fear the Mafia and upcoming battles that's going to happen in the future, exposing Suna to the horrors of the Mafia war in a way worse matter, which then adds a huge impact and memory in the vessel of Suna's character. And speaking of vessels, we're now introduced to his own, one and only vessel, Kurom Dukuro. After losing her right eye and her organs in a car accident, she lost her will to live and even accepted her death as a salvation from her suffering. Thanks to her shitty parents, however, Mukuro saves her, possesses her, and gives her hope to live. Although he doesn't seem to show it often, Mukuro seems to care about her because he hasn't fully possessed her. Kurom also has one of the coolest character designs that I've seen in this series. She is quite small for her age with a short pineapple-style hair like Mukuro's. She has a violet eyes, but once was covered by a black eye patch with a chrome-colored skull reflecting her name, Kurom Dukuro. Dukuro means skull in Japanese. Despite not being the strongest character in the group, especially when compared to Mukuro, she still has one of the greatest redeemable qualities along with the other cast. She has a very mysterious past, which makes her very interesting. Naturally, it makes me want to know more about her, as she is one of my favorite characters in the series. She, much like the other characters, have their own spot of development, and seeing her on screen is very fascinating to see her struggling. She's very brave and has no problem having Suna as a boss and pretty much anybody else who is part of the Mafia. And do not count out Reborn either. Despite not being a guardian himself, he actually becomes the default mentor character who not only leads Suna and everyone else throughout their journey, but also pushes these characters to their limit. His dialogue is never boring and very interesting, and I thought that Nico, the character who voiced him, played Reborn very well. There's even the civilian characters like Kyoko, Haru, Ipin, Bianchi, Futa, Suna's mother, Nana. There's just so many to name. And don't even get me started on the people on the other side, from the Varia, the Arcobalenos, the Millefior, and eventually reaching to the Simon Familia, who are yet to be animated. And it's all these characters who all come together to form an amazing mixture with action, genre, with a plot that works very effectively. Every battle and conflict that takes place in the show holds so much weight and meaning into them. You feel the tension becomes very intriguing, especially knowing that the whole story is constantly centered around the mafia, which may start off as one thing, it later delves into another aspect of it that really works so well in capturing the mafia archetype and its history, albeit in a more anime setting. It just goes on and on about explanations for the things that you would think to be typical or shonen tropes, like about the power-ups, the constant reliance of wanting to protect your friends that you deeply cherish, your family, your loved ones, but yet again, it is done in a way that is so well balanced in my book. Considering that the entire power system in the show runs in the aspect of your willpower, and how everything that happens is done based on the aspect of your desires and what you want out of life, including the current situation that you're in. It makes all these equipments, devices, power-ups, or anything that the character may get to boost their strength, their dreams, their pride, their chemistry that they formed with individuals who were close to them, their endless effort that shines in the baby blue skies, actually feel warranted and earned.
目の前で大事な仲間を失ったら死んでも死にきれねえ。
Another thing that vibed with me as well was its protagonist, named Suna. I did make a video on Suna a few months back called The Case of Shinyoshi Sawada. There, I fully addressed all the major issues that people had with him, as he's one of the most misunderstood anime characters. If you want a full detailed analysis on this character, I highly recommend you check out this video. Never fear, as the spoilers in there are only minor ones. As for the ones who don't mind, let's move on. I promise, I will try not to repeat myself too much. Suna from Hitman Reborn acts very different than your standard shonen protagonist. While most shonen characters start off being confident, dumb, but fearless, and is often always up for a fight, Suna, on the other hand, this character gets every emotion you need to feel in every scene. He is frantic, he is whiny, and he ends up complaining. He lacks enthusiasm, he's often a crybaby, and it may even negatively impacts the comedy that the anime is sometimes heavily focused on, but to me, it never really reached to the point where he becomes annoying. At the beginning of the series, granted, he started off at his lowest point. The dude allowed people to walk all over him, but he eventually does grow enough to learn that his kindness is actually a choice. He accepts his friends' crazy antics and only ever try to change them when their behavior is detrimental to them. He's not a wrecked character like Shinji Ikari from Evangelion, nor is he someone with a usual big shonen dream like Izuku Midoriya from My Hero Academia. Rather, he's the opposite. He's just a normal kid who has a concept of what it's like to live a normal life, a concept that isn't all that uncommon with the people in our society. He's shaped by his environment like most of us are, only for him to suddenly being exposed to the horrors of the Mafia War, being dragged constantly, and was even forced to fight his way to keep him and everyone else from harm. These events scarred Suna. His fear towards the Mafia feels very real and believable, given to the fact of how young he is. His emotions are something that a lot of people can identify with. Some may call it annoying and find it rather to be unpleasant, but to tell you the truth, if the Mafia doesn't scare you, I don't know what does. I would have done most of these actions if I were in his shoes, because it's a natural reaction, a real tension. Suna, who's so practically so thrust into the Mafia that he later becomes exhausted both physically and mentally. But as he journeys through, he later starts to adapt and learn. He doesn't get stronger to be the Mafia boss, as his own tutor keeps on telling him. He only does it to protect his friends and to fulfill a common goal, all the while being humble to who he is. He encourages trusted people around him, even if he has problems with his self-worth and confidence. Some of my favorite moments with him are when he is proud of his friends or when he comments about just how they care. His morals never waver, even though he is surrounded by dangerous people. What makes a character a true leader in Hitman Reborn isn't determined by what their title name is, the ability to control their subordinates through their will and power, but rather it focuses purely on how they treat people, not about how they treat power or how fearsome their title is. It's important to lead people, it's important to have a name, but it's even more important to have empathy, to have compassion towards any other human beings. Vongole Decimo to Suna is just a leader Mafia title that's given to him, and he prefers to be a leader in his own way by being there for his people in need. If you're the kind of leader who does what you think is right, rather than caring about a title that's given to you or about how much power you have, then that is what makes you a true leader. And because of that, through my eyes and experience, I became very touched by the importance of their friendship and family woven together in the series. And it happened in every arc and every scene. From fighting off an evil organization, from time traveling 10 years in the future, and I could go on. Every setting, every background that takes place in their respective arcs has a very natural, colorful atmosphere and feels very cinematic. Sure, it may not compare to shows today, but even so, it has a very aesthetic vibe, almost making you feel like you're watching a 90s anime. And while we're on the topic of art styles, the art styles of the anime adaptation and the manga is what I truly value a lot about the series. They start off somewhat cartoony, but later they evolved and changed to be more artistic. You can even compare the anime's first episode and the first chapter of the manga to their respective final parts to see the difference. The manga's proportions of each character is correct, their eyes design is very well constructed, their face and head shape, their body, even their color schemes feel very comfortable to look at. As I said, it does start off very cartoony, but I assure you, it really gets to evolve if you stick around. The manga of Hitman Reborn was designed and created by Akira Amano, whom as you might know, to be the same character and artwork designer of Psycho Pass. And as you'd expect, yes, you cannot go wrong with their art style. As for the anime adaptation, much like how the manga's art style improves chapter after chapter, the anime has its own improvements to it, like the character designs, the animations, the visuals. Time after time, they eventually evolve in every arc. They feel fresh and colorful and very natural. Now, like most things, Hitman Reborn isn't perfect, and I think it's only fair to address my nitpicks with it. For starters, the anime adaptation of Hitman Reborn censored a lot of things. From Gokudera smoking, which happened in the manga, but not in the anime. There were even extra chapters that weren't fully adapted in the manga. Not including the Inheritance Ceremony arc and the Curse of the Rainbow arc, I'm talking about certain chapters that contains a very crucial part to their character development. Case in point being Kyoko and Yamamoto, which I won't spoil for several reasons. And I'm not even ashamed to admit that the ending of the manga was very rushed. I'm not gonna explain how, but it is what it is. But despite this, I respect it. It is how Akira Amano wanted it to end. The average review of Hitman Reborn is that while it is a good show, very good, it would have been even greater if it got to the point faster, which addresses the daily life arc. I admit, even though the daily life arc personally grew with me, I can still somewhat agree to that point, given that even though I'm more used to the daily life arc, I'm sure not everyone's going to be, but I hope it does, especially if you're into comedy and perhaps action. Honestly, if Hitman Reborn really did return one day, I'm more than positive enough to say that not only are the casual anime fans who are willing to pick it up, but also the fans of the series that are still out there will be happy and will be fully satisfied, like myself. 2012 was a very memorable experience year for me, because that was during the time in my youthful days in middle school. I discovered the anime after watching Bleach. Japanese anime was a big thing for me, even as a child, after watching Studio Ghibli's Spirited Away back then. It made me discover more anime since then, and I got into the show eventually. Hitman Reborn did not just invest me to anime, Japanese culture, but it helped me to open towards everything, from movies, video games, comic books, pretty much any kinds of media, and so on. Because, furthermore, when I first watched it as a teenager, I wasn't very open up to everything. My standards were low, and I didn't have a good impression on everything. But as I grew older, into an adult, and gave it a chance, Hitman Reborn made me more open up to everything, in a good way for that matter. It taught me that I shouldn't just blindly overlook something and just rather take the time to engulf myself, diving deeper, understand all the aspects to it. Good anime doesn't just need good analysis or the idea for growing up with them, but what it does need is respect. People tend to love certain shows for a reason, and that alone pretty much describes my feelings towards Hitman Reborn. The more I watched the anime, the more I read the manga, the more interesting things I found about it than the last time I did, that's all. And it's safe to say that I'm pretty much a dedicated fan to it ever since. And I'm just going to be one of those people who still praises it till this day, even after 10 years of its airing. It's a series that is very close to me. And if you're one of the fans of Hitman Reborn like myself and you're watching this video right now, please, let us hear from you in the comments. I know you have to be out there. With that being said, Most importantly, I hope this video does its best to help you give the series another chance, or at least the willingness to watch it. It's the exact kind of anime and manga that I'd like to read and watch in every age, one that just engulfs me in its world again and again, with its characters, the story, the world setting. And if you're new and you're interested, welcome. We are more than glad to have you as a fan. And so, let's all stand as one with Karaku Hitman Reborn as we dive to world as a familia. Thank you for reaching this far, and have a happy new year.